So I did use UML as a diagramming technique, but I never ever believed that it would be useful for generating complete applications. And software factories was another run at the same concept. That was another 15 years later.
Like for me, this is all the things that they were promoting while I was studying. It's like, this is gonna be it. That's exactly that time frame. So,
and AI is that now, right? Copilot or similar, where it's like, oh yeah, we don't need programmers because we're just going to be able to tell the AI and it'll create the program for us.
Yeah, because we're really good in making specifications that are exact.
See, and that's the problem.
Hey there, welcome to Beta Talks, the podcast. I'm Rick.
And I'm Oscar.
And today we are joined by Lhotka, who is the VP of Strategy at Xebia.
Welcome, Rocky.
Welcome.
Yeah, hi everybody. Glad to be here.
Well, it's so great to have you. So the VP of Strategy at Xebia. So we know Xebia here in the Netherlands because it used to be, I think, the mother company for Xspirit, and I think now the people of Xspirit are also part of Xebia. But it's more than that, right? And could you maybe shortly introduce the company and then what it is that you do there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So Xebia was the parent company or mother company for Xspirit. Xspirit started in the Netherlands and was very successful, and then spread to Belgium and Germany, and about 2 years ago into the U.S. And then a while ago, this is all branding and whatever else, but they're like, okay, it's successful, so we're going to roll it into the parent company, and so the name changed, but. So now what we're called is the Xebia Microsoft Services, because our entire focus is on GitHub and Azure, cloud modernization, cloud migration, GitHub enablement, GitHub migrations, that sort of thing. And that covers a lot of ground, of course, right? It's all the way from cloud infrastructure through DevOps and application development. And so there's a lot of variety and a lot of cool stuff. The parent company does a whole bunch of other things and has groups that focus on low code and on functional programming and quite a variety of things. And kind of the business model, I think, always has been to create these small focused companies. And if they succeed, if there's really a market demand, and they grow, then they get kind of rebranded into the parent company. So,
yeah, and I think you already said it's successful, but I think there was a time in which Xspirit was, for us at least, it was everywhere. So yes, it was, and that I mean that in a good sense. So I can also imagine that it was a good idea to take this route. How did you get into Xebia or Xspirit, and how was your, maybe in short, your career up until now?
That's probably a good way to handle it. So I've been in the industry for a long time, as you can probably tell from the little bit of gray in my beard. And so I started in the industry in the 1980s. I just saw a meme on the internet, just if you bear with me on a tangent, but it was saying that and it had to deal with aircraft, but it was a photo of a 1941 state-of-the-art fighter aircraft, and from World War II, and it said the time difference from 1941 to 1981 or 84, whatever. Was the same, or is the same, as from the early 80s to now. and so it had 3 generations of aircraft, right? The 1941 the early 1980s and modern aircraft. Like, now I feel really old.
It hurts.
Yeah, they do that. They do that to you, right?
Anyway, so I started programming on. Well, at the time, we used to have a thing called Minicomputers, which, because there were mainframes, and then mini-computers that were only the size of a refrigerator. Were that was the smallest computer available, and so I programmed on something called a DEC VAX, and using VT52 green screen terminals, and this was also the time that Unix was just starting to become a thing, and so there was the big back and forth between the DEC VAX and various Unix providers and a whole bunch of other. There was a lot of opportunity at the time, and anyway, so I was just out of university, had a computer science degree, and ended up working for a company that built software for concrete ready mix. So dispatching, order taking, all sorts of stuff, and it was a very small company, and I got to do a lot of really cool things very early in my career. I was, I think, fortunate. And I left there and went to a biomedical manufacturing company that was a little bit bigger, but still quite small. And I was there for 6.5 years, I guess. And there too, couldn't have been better from a career perspective, because I started as well, we called them programmers at the time. I think I was a programmer 2 or something, but these days we generally use developer or engineer, but I had the opportunity there to work with everything from sales to inventory to manufacturing to shipping, and I had a boss that was extremely challenging in a good way. Right. It was always like, man, you got to quit just looking at the code. You got to look at the business problems. Step back and think about the problem you're trying to solve, not just the code. And so in that short 6-year time frame, I ended up being the manager of the entire development group. And I just think about that, and Dan Dilla was the guy that I worked for, and he and I still stay in touch today, because what a fantastic mentor. Anyway, from there I went into consulting, a small but rapidly growing consulting company. I think I was the 186th hire or something like that. And I was there for about 6 years. And when I left, it was about 1,200 people. And I left there, went to another consulting company called Magenic. And I was at Magenic for about 22 years. And, by this point, I'd started writing books and speaking at conferences, and which was part of why I shifted from one company to another, because Magenic was extremely supportive of what I was doing in the public sphere, and really enabled a lot, including became the major patron of the CSLA open source framework that I've worked on for almost 30 years now. And so I did a lot of different things at Magenic. It was super fun, very enjoyable. And so when we sold Magenic to Cognizant, this was 4 or 5 years ago, something. I kind of decided I was going to semi-retire and just speak and write books and that sort of thing. But I ended up at a conference talking to Marcel de Vries, who was one of the people that started Xspirit, and he and I have been friends for a very, very, very long time. But just because because we met each other, I don't know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Anyway, so he and I were talking, and he's like, well, why don't you come work for me? And I'm like, I'm semi-retiring. And he's like, no, but this is fun. We're just starting this thing in the US, and we could really use the, some of the insights that you've had from working in these two different consulting companies that, grew very rapidly. And so that's basically, he talked me into, joining because it is fun.
So he talked you out of retirement?
Yeah, basically. Yeah,
out of semi-retirement. Okay.
Out of semi-retirement. Yeah, I mean, I still am, speaking, and I'm working on CSLA and that sort of thing. But I'm also helping Xebia Microsoft services grow and be successful and offering what advice I can anyway. So it's quite, and it is a lot of fun. I had forgotten after, over 20 years at Magenic, because when I started at Magenic, it was all scrappy and by the time that I left, we were again over 1,000 people, and just everything was completely different, right? And so here I am back at a scrappy, fighting tooth and nail, and I'd kind of forgotten how much fun it is.
Well, that's great to hear. And to be honest, when I started developing, I think you were already at least visible, or at least early on in my career, you were already visible. And it's quite impressive that you're still relevant, still out there. I think you still hold the Azure of the Microsoft MVP and the Regional Director awards, right?
I do, yes. Yeah,
so
thank you.
That means that you're still very active, also in the community, and still very relevant. How they are such different, let's say even eras. If you look at a mini PC the size of a refrigerator, or now everything being in the cloud. What's the?
I think we all worked with developers that were experienced, started in the 80s.
Yeah.
And a lot of them at some point were like, okay, I always do it like this. Leave me alone.
This has been it.
But I think it says you're special. Like if you're keeping up, continuing conferences, and like this is very impressive, I must say. Like, I hope I'm still enjoying the work after a career like that. Like it's amazing.
So what would be your main or your biggest, the biggest impact, the change that had the biggest impact? That's what I actually wanted to ask. So what has been in everything from even rational unified process and agile, and we've seen and heard about all of them, but also technology wise, what was the biggest thing that maybe drove you or inspired you over the last couple of years?
Well, I have always been fascinated with distributed computing. And this sounds maybe a little strange, but all the way back in the 80s, when arcades were a big deal, you watch movies like Tron and things from that time frame, and arcades were in video games. And I remember the first time that I saw a video game in an arcade that was networked to another game. So you could have two players, actually, I think it was two. And it was a type of asteroids game, but you could both be on each other's screen, shooting the asteroids and stuff. And, I was a teenager at that time, and it just, God, that caught my imagination. I'm like, wow, this is the idea of people sitting at different computers interacting with each other in some shared virtual space, just captured my imagination. And so all of my career, I have been, even that early biomedical manufacturing company. This was at the early days of email, basically. Usenet was a thing. It was long before the web, the internet that we know today. But I actually wrote software to be able to trade messages, files, and email across multiple offices that we had. And I remember going to one of the first Microsoft marketing briefings on something, this new thing called Outlook. And I'm like, oh, hey, I wrote one of those.
I know what you're doing.
I know what you're doing.
Too.
And so, I mean, but that's been my motivation all this time. And so, you talk about big impact things. I think obviously the PC itself was a big deal. It drove a shift from green screen text-based terminals into graphical interface. So it wasn't just the PC; it was Windows. To be fair, I was uninterested in the PC until Windows came along, and even that, it was Windows NT that got me interested, because I was used to what I thought of a modern operating system with virtual memory and that sort of thing, which the VAX had. And Windows NT was the first PC operating system that I encountered that had such a thing. And so the PC, certainly graphical interfaces, I think, was the big deal there. The web coming along, it was fun to watch, because that whole thing, percolated throughout the entire 1990s. HTTP was not a foregone conclusion. There were other competing technologies in the 90s, including one called Gopher, which comes from Minnesota, which is where I live. And our sports team for the university here is called the Gophers. So anyway, so the web obviously was probably the second big wave. And I think of it like this, that I started my career programming using terminals to talk to a central computer. And then we went to Windows PCs and graphical interfaces for a while. And then the early web came along and was really going back to running everything on a central computer, except that instead of green screens, we now had colorful terminals. And it wasn't until the iPad really disrupted the PC era that the web shifted, I think, and became. I mean, two things happened with the iPad. One is that Windows was the default. You could always write software for Windows and be safe, and all of a sudden you couldn't. And the second thing is that it forced the web to stop being used like a dumb terminal and actually use the browser as a client runtime, because end users were not interested, and I don't think most developers either wanted to go back to programming everything on the server. And the only way you can do that in this new browser-based world is to use JavaScript, right? And then the next big thing was the cloud, which again we look at the cloud as a thing, but man, that was tried in different variations multiple times in my career. And variety of ways that this was attempted. And of course, what we know is the cloud now sits on top of an awful lot of other technologies and attempts. But so I've seen a number of really cool technology shifts that were really quite substantial.
It's interesting that all those big shifts are basically also the same loop going over and over again, because like
it's a matrix.
No, it's like it's going from centralized to decentralized and bouncing in between, and basically that what you're describing is like the iPad was again a thick client after simple rendering. Physically it was thin, but
right.
It's weird actually. But like, and we went back and we see now a push in like front end frameworks or actually HTML again. It's like, oh, you can run it at server side, and we're also getting a bit old at the moment. Like, well, I've seen this whole route before.
There's a reason my beard is this short, because otherwise you see all the gray.
All the gray. we've seen these loops, and somehow every time an iteration comes by, like one of the things we learned before now gets introduced again in a slightly different manner and becomes successful or not. Like you see the cloud, like this last run, really, that's the default now. While a lot of these options were available in bigger data centers, but I think the thing that just changed there is that you didn't longer think about, like, I have a database which probably called SQL, and I have some compute which is web server of some kind. We started using all kinds of in-between services that are specific for compute and for cache and start combining those blocks together. But I think, like, if you look further back, that happened a lot of times.
But it's also all about timing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember. Yeah, I even remember seeing it myself, that Bill Gates had this really awesome video in which he was saying, now there's this thing, it looks like a watch, but there's so much more you can do with it. And it didn't work whatsoever. They had an email on it, they had weather on it, everything. It didn't work. And then
Like,
fast forward like
device-wise, Microsoft most of the time is a bit too early.
It does seem like that, yes.
Yeah, or is that maybe to spark the interest of others so that they will continue investing in a form factor like that? I mean, maybe that's a bit too far-fetched. One of the things, Rocky, that really stood out to me is the fact that you told a story about the two gaming devices being connected.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a piece of magic that sparked an interest in you that lasted you an entire career, right? And I think that is exactly what people need if they want to go look for a job, that they don't feel like they have to really work very hard and be able to do that for the rest of their life. And it sounds like if you found something that really sparked your interest and that really stood out to you, and then you could make your living out of that. I mean, how awesome is that, right?
Right. Oh, I count myself as being very fortunate to find something that I really enjoyed, and then it turns out that the thing I really enjoy, you can make money at it. I mean, that's not true for everybody.
Oh, true. That's definitely not true for everybody.
Yeah, it's sometimes easy. Like I would almost give someone the advice: just do the thing you love and be good at it. Like the rest will come. But like that's, from our perspective, that's the normal. But like if you love playing a guitar, it's a lot of work to get around. Like it's hard work. Like you won't by default be well paid. Let's say
if you love macrameing or knitting, then not necessarily is that something you should pursue a career in. So
yeah, I think we should count ourselves lucky that I'm wondering how that works, and if I could also build that kind of spark, we can do still every day, and every time a bigger abstraction comes around, and we can do more.
But that's not the only thing, right? And I'm curious to hear from you, Rocky. So one of the things I've been working on lately is a bit of home automation, and I started out with this relatively easy environment in which it was all done for you, but that also limited your possibilities. So now I jumped onto Home Assistant, allowing me to run that locally on, I think I have a Raspberry Pi in a closet somewhere. So it's running there. So
you're building another data center in your house. A small one.
Of course. No, but the question I actually wanted to move towards is, are there any things that are currently used out there where you literally said, I'm not jumping on this bandwagon. It's either too complex or too far from what I'm normally doing. Did you encounter that by any chance? Because I know I've felt like that a couple of times, and then I was forced into actually still learning about it. But have you ever had technologies or things come by where you thought, this is just
skip this round.
This is just not me, man. I'm going to skip this one.
I have, definitely, several times. So way back, there was a thing called 4GLs. And this would have been in the early 1990s, I guess. And it was fourth generation languages. So things like C# and Java and C++ are all third generation, 3GLs. So 4GLs were an attempt at abstraction to make higher level productivity. I was too young to see CASE, which was computer assisted software engineering, I want to say. But 4GLs was basically CASE. We'll try CASE again and see if we can do it, and we'll call it 4GLs. And I'm like, man, that looks pretty sketchy to me. So I stayed away from it. I'm glad I did, because those things came and went. Companies built big systems on them, and of course then we're left orphaned because the technologies went away. And I think you'd early on maybe mentioned UML. UML fits into that category. It was an attempt to, at its core, to diagram everything such that it could generate your code for you. And UML almost never got there in terms of tooling. So I did use UML as a diagramming technique, but I never ever believed that it would be useful for generating complete applications. And software factories was another run at the same concept. That was another, 15 years later.
Like for me, this is all the things that they were promoting while I was studying. It's like, this is gonna be it. That's exactly that time frame. So,
and AI is that now, right? Copilot or similar, where it's like, oh yeah, we don't need programmers because we're just going to be able to tell the AI and it'll create the program for us.
Yeah, because we're really good in making specifications that are exact.
See, and that's the problem. I think it's actually two problems. That's one of them. And the other one is that in my life in general, I've observed that it's a minority of people that think in terms of systems. And if you're a software developer, you by definition think in terms of systems at some level, because you're building a system, right? You're building a simulation of the real world. But most people, in my observation, don't actually think that way. And if you don't think that way, how can you tell the AI how to do a thing? You know what I mean? So
and that code gets generated. That doesn't mean you're not coding anymore.
No,
there's code being generated, blocks of code being reused. Like, it's just an abstraction.
But also last week it auto suggested something for me, and I thought, well, let's have a look. So I accepted it, and then I started reading, and it was just literally it switched the X and Y things around for what I actually needed it for. Now that's not a problem, because still I had to type a lot less than I had to type if I would have built it myself. But because I know how it actually works, and because I can read what comes out of it, and because I understand, I can also change it around, right? So that it works.
Yeah, I love those examples now where they I'm with one prompt I can create an entire app that does this. Yes, because it's basically a replica of something that already exists. Which is not normally the work I'm doing. No,
that's completely true.
And it all help, but I really think that if we get to that point that the prompt is basically a specification to generate an application, then that's the code. It's just another layer. I think if you look at the most languages now, comparing, 20, 30 years ago, like the way we can express ourselves in there, to me, it feels so natural already. So,
dude, in school, I had to build assembly.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, we've come so far. So, as far as I'm concerned, we don't have to be scared for our jobs anytime soon. We can still be doing awesome stuff. So, one of the things, Rocket, that you're doing is CSLA.net. For people not familiar with it, could you maybe explain what this is? Because it's currently still very active. I just checked the last check-in or the last commit was, I think, 16 hours ago or something.
Probably.
So it's really actively worked on. So in short, what's CSLA.net?
CSLA is an attempt to create a framework for business logic to elevate it to the same level as UI and data access. Over my career, at least once Visual Basic showed up on the scene in the early 1990s and Power Builder, those were probably the first real compelling UI frameworks. And of course, we've, in the Microsoft world, have had a lot since then, right? We've had Windows Forms and WPF and Web Forms and MVC and all the way up through to Blazor today.
Mm-hmm.
Lots and lots of really, at the time, excellent UI frameworks. You look back on them now and you're like, oh, they could have done this, that, and the other thing better. But at the time, every one of them was really quite compelling. And the same is true with data access. We've had in the Microsoft space, RDO and DAO and ADO.NET and Entity Framework and ODBC and it's quite a long list of different frameworks for talking to relational databases.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you can look back and go, oh, they should have done this, that, and the other thing. But each one of them at the time was pretty revolutionary and changed the way we were able to build software. The thing is, I've spent my career working on enterprise business software, and business logic is the third big piece of every one of these puzzles, right? And if there's not a specific home for business logic, it either ends up written in stored procedures in the database, which I think most of us today would think is not so much fun, and or
you
it gets
put that
written.
very mildly, Rocky.
Yeah, I try to be nice.
I have a hard time putting my breakpoints there.
Or you end up writing the business logic in the presentation layer, whether that be behind button click events or in a controller, or basically places that you should never be putting business logic. And and because my career all the way through from the very beginning was so focused on these complex business scenarios, back in the 90s, I started trying to come up with ways to formalize business logic, and it grew into this CSLA thing that became an open source framework, and especially with .NET now, like you said, has been actively managed and updated and continues to be there's well over 100 contributors to this, which in the open source world is not maybe a huge number, but it's nice. There's a lot of people that have come and gone over the years that have contributed fantastic things to it, to make it continue to work and solve real problems for people. So,
and that's what you do it for, right? That you have something out there that you've put a lot of time and effort in, and then apparently it gets picked up by others who start working with it, and that's just awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what time it is, Oscar?
Is it time for a totally random question?
It's time for a totally random question. Rocky, if you could take a vacation inside any video game or virtual world, which one would it be and why?
Wow.
Because I heard you mention a gaming PC at just before we hit record on the podcast.
I've never really thought about that. I think though it would have to be one of the Star Trek games. I'm tapping into that because if there's any future that I would like to live in, it's probably the Star Trek future. There's opportunities for most people to live a peaceful, productive life that is fulfilling, and I could easily see myself being one of those people. And if you want
that
adventure,
in itself is already very, very promising, right?
Right. And if you want adventure, you can join Starfleet. So it's
compared to a lot of other imaginary worlds, most of them are pretty dark.
You see, that's exactly right.
Yeah, unless you go Minecraft, but still there's zombies and killer fish and stuff.
Yeah, so. Even that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually not too bad of a choice there.
And if you want to escape, you go to the holodeck.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I can only hear good things. So going back into tech just a little bit, we already talked about what had the most impact on you or on your career, which was a great story about the video games. What do you think in the last couple of years, and I'm now more specifically looking at everything that's available in the cloud, what do you think has had the biggest impact on how we view compute, or how compute is now a front and center part of our everyday life with mobile phones and stuff?
Boy, I've got a couple different answers to that. So I think the one I'm going to go with is if you go back to the year roughly 2000, Microsoft had a project at the time called Hailstorm, and it was an attempt to create a bunch of services that would allow us to store things like our documents and our medical history and a whole range of things in the cloud. Even though I don't think it was maybe called the cloud yet at that time, but and the promise was, when you're traveling and you get sick, that anywhere you are, you've got your access to your health information, your medical history, and anywhere you go, you have access to your files. And it wasn't just Microsoft that was doing this, right? It was Google and others, but Microsoft had this thing called Hailstorm. And Hailstorm kind of came and went and became maybe a laughing stock in some circles. But I think about this, and I'm like, and it was maybe what Oscar said, sometimes Microsoft moves too early, because that's where we are today. I mean, their vision was absolutely correct. My medical health information is in the cloud. In the US, there's a couple really big medical provider cloud services, and mine's all in one of them. And all of my files are in Dropbox or OneDrive. People have their stuff in iCloud, whatever, but it's normal now for everybody's, files, data, financials, everything to be somewhere in the cloud. And you can just grab your phone and get at it literally anywhere on the planet, as long as you have internet or whatever. And, so 24 years ago, that was a laughing stock dream. It's like, nobody's ever going to do this, right? And here we are. Everybody does it. There's all sorts of technology behind the scenes, but I think about the social impact and there's an implicit contract between us as developers and all of our users, and that's set by the users and what they see around them and the expectations they have. And I think about this too, that this is what drove the adoption of the graphic interface back in the 90s. Was IT did not want to do it. It's expensive. We already knew how to build everything that ran on a mainframe or mini computer and use green screen terminals. Why would we spend all that money to rewrite everything to be a graphic interface? But the users at home were starting to buy PCs, and PCs had Quicken or whatever at the time. And they were like, well, my compute experience, my personal experience with technology at home is so far superior to this crappy experience I have at work. Yeah. And that driver exists still today, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, I buy my iPhone or my Android phone, and I have these fantastic experiences working with my bank or with airlines or whatever it is. And it drives all of us, even if we're building internal corporate software, to move to a better level of productivity for our users.
Yeah, and then I think you can guess the next question, right? What do you envision will be the next big step?
Well, I hate to jump on the AI bandwagon too firmly, mm-hmm. but because I there's all that hyperbole around general AI and it's going to take over the world and blah blah blah. But it is pretty clear to me at this point that the generative LLM, what we're calling AI, is in fact transformative for real people, in their real lives, and not always in a good way. Like my wife, in her work, she does a lot of Googling, and Google has become horrible. She was an extremely good, she knew very well how to run Google. Well, now all this AI stuff is in there, and you can't, all those skills that you had about using the internet are gone. But hopefully, ultimately, this, what we're calling AI ends up doing a better job than what people were able to do as a Google expert.
Yeah, I think that's the most important part, right? Where I really like the fact that you say what we are calling AI, that we use that just to make ourselves more productive and do things better, right? And I think that's really where it needs to be. And I'm not really sure about the entire generative thing about AI, but it being a tool that we can have in our toolbox to enable us to do our work either better, faster, or both. I mean, why not? Right?
Yeah, I think we're still calling it AI because we're in the hype. You see, everything we used to call AI now has a name, and it's just some service or some specific solution for something. These LLMs are still called AI because, we need some capital to prove that it works. But I think in the next phase it will cool down, but it will definitely make us more productive in different ways. And like the other mostly invisible technologies, like proper networking, wireless connectivity, small devices with enough power to be able to run a browser or whatever, I think that makes the big next step in the end. I think if you look at the internet, and I definitely started to be really into this.
Started to use it, yeah.
in the 90s, like in school, and everyone was staring at me. It's like, why would you read your email on holiday? Because I can. But at some point, all the things that are working against that dream, that service that Microsoft then presented in 2000, like it gets enabled by a lot of tiny evolutions everywhere, which like normal users will not see at all. And I think this AI will just move to the background to enabling your assistant, your voice assistant on your phone or in your car or whatever, to connect to a lot of other things. And I think it's more of a connector because it's a nice human interface.
Yeah.
Interpreter. So we can actually connect to the service we normally need to give specific instructions or push buttons.
One of our previous guests said, "Let's make AI be make Siri smarter." Right? Well, yeah. I have Google Assistants at home, but if I say turn off the lights in the garden, it doesn't work.
It's like
but if I say
describing buttons to push,
but turn out the lights outside because they have outside in the name, then it works. I mean, you should understand that the garden is outside, dude.
It's like I'm sometimes throwing to the Google Assistant, trying things at home. It's like, you should interpret this, and sometimes they actually someone forced on that, like, and it's like, so make it Christmas, and then I assume that the Christmas lights turn on and music starts playing, but normally we'll skip those.
With us, it does the red and the green lights, and it does play some Christmas music. But
like you get into that, it's like, you know what I mean? Like that's where we can use these LLMs. I kind of hate the whole image generation and assuming that it's creative and taking almost the fun out of that hobby or whatever for someone. But yeah.
Well, I think there is, we as developers, I think we tend to look at what's going on with AI as a general positive because to us it feels like it's a productivity booster and a tool, and it is. But I think what you just said, Oscar, is really true, which is that there are not just hobbyists, but a lot of people that on the fringe of their career, their moonlighting job is to create art. And I think they're under a lot of threat. That whole cottage industry, and maybe even real artists are under some level of threat. Although I'm not confident that that's, and of course, quote unquote, real artist. What does that mean? But people that create distinctive art, the AI can't do that because it hasn't been trained on something that doesn't yet exist. So I'm less concerned about truly creative art, but I think an awful lot of what we think of as art, graphic tools or video that are used in marketing or games or a lot of different things. I think that those segments of industry are under real threat, and I'm sure others are as well. And that's why I don't. I know some people discount AI and they're like, this is flash in the pan. This is not going to, But I think that's the wrong attitude. I think it is a major thing that's going to have a real economic impact in a lot of people's lives. Sometimes it'll be like for us, where it's a productivity booster and makes our lives better. And for some people, it's going to completely eliminate their job opportunities.
Yeah, and let's hope that the last scenario doesn't occur all too often. But like you said,
or at least that it creates new opportunities.
Yeah, Yeah. So I'm really curious. So we'll talk in like 5 to 10 years, Rocky, and see what came through of what we just discussed. He's probably just helping another company somewhere, becoming even more awesome. Rocky, is there anything that you would like to get back to, or anything that you would like to add, where you think, hey, the listeners should know this about either me or Xebia?
I just think, regardless of the big AI trend, the reality is that there are still a lot of organizations out there that have not yet moved to some sort of cloud-based fabric, or have only partially moved for a variety of reasons. And I continue to see that as being a really big thing in the industry. Our industry is that movement to some sort of cloud-based, and even if it's a cloud that you run inside your own data center, which might be a valid thing, the capabilities that you get out of containers and Kubernetes and all these other technologies continue to be really compelling, in my opinion. And on the UI side, at the moment, in the Microsoft space, Blazor is a real big deal. And I'm very excited about using and kind of helping people become very productive with Blazor. And then to bring that around to CSLA, you can probably guess that an awful lot of the time that I'm spending with CSLA is how to make it really, really work well in the Blazor space, and also in the Kubernetes container-based server side. And so these are the things that I'm using AI to help me be more productive at, are these areas, right? And so that's myself, and then of course Xebia, the Microsoft Services Group, that we're primarily focused on the server side, but the thing is, when most organizations are like, hey, we're going to move to the cloud, and we really want to take advantage of the cloud, become cloud native, you end up rewriting the app, and so that's where something like Blazor or whatever comes into play as well. So it's just so much fun. There's so many cool things going on.
There's that spark again that he saw like a couple of decades ago with that video game, and I'm expecting, Rocky, that you won't be going into early retirement anytime soon.
Yeah, apparently not.
Enjoy, and thank you so much for being our guest. It was awesome having you on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Better Talks, the podcast. Better Talks is made possible by Bandwidth Managed Software Development.
We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.